Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Mr. Don Jeffries. He is an author. He's been on many times to talk about the JFK assassination. We always say we're going to talk about JFK's son. Never do. RFK, I think we talked about once or twice, maybe twice, but we've largely covered what a lot of you and me kind of look into, which is the JFK assassination, history elements, things that are kind of told to us in one way, and then we end up learning about it later, which could be a whole different way, such as like the presidential spot. I have different opinions after hearing about LBJ's time in administration and then just other things that go on behind the backworks that you don't read in a history book. But Don, can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
It's great to be back, Robbie. We have done this a number of times. I'm getting close to being the dean of the research community, I think, uncredited though it may be. I've been at this for a long time. I started as a teenager in the mid 1970s working with Mark Lanes as an unpaid volunteer for Citizens Committee of Inquiry. So I go back pretty far in this. So this has consumed me for about 50 years now. And obviously, I write about other stuff too, but this is my wheelhouse issue. Obviously, it's the one that means the most to me and I spent the most time on.
Why do you think it matters? I get so many comments on my channel, like, why does it matter? It's 60 years or so later. And I'm like, well, I don't know. That comment always gets me every time, just hits like a nerve or something. Because I'm like, there's people that play Minecraft on YouTube and people watch them. Why the hell does this one thing bother you?
Yeah, right. Well, I think it's a lot is going on. There's been a huge anti Kennedy campaign, anti JFK campaign, starting again in the mid '70s with Judith Campbell Exner and all that to make it. He was martyred at first, so they had the Camelot myth, and yeah, that was mythology. But the new negative stuff is mythology as well. So they've tried to make him such a distasteful character that people don't care. They say, why should we care about how he died? His life was insignificant. You have people like Noam Chomsky, who was, also thinks 9/11 was just what they said it was. And he says, it doesn't matter. I don't care about why Kennedy died, and says that nothing would have changed in Vietnam. You've got a lot of people on the left thinking that. So I think that's out there, and that's especially young people. It's so long ago, it's 60 years ago, and they don't realize how in many ways, this started at least the modern conspiracy movement. As far as I know, the term conspiracy theory was not used very often until the JFK assassination. You had conspiracy theorists before going back, Pearl Harbor and lots of things like that, but they didn't really call it conspiracy theorists. And with JFK, and then of course, you had the April 1st, 1967 memo from the CIA, which basically really popularized the term conspiracy theory and was a how-to guide to the Mockingbird media on how to cover this subject. Use friendly assets and stress the kind of things we've still see the media stress. So I think it's a very important issue because look, the entire 1960s, without the JFK assassination, we don't know if there would have been a counterculture movement because I don't think there would have been an extensive Vietnam War. We don't know if there would have been a bunch of drugs and LSD and acid rock and all these things that happened. Certainly, RFK would have never been assassinated because he was only assassinated, I think, because of JFK. Probably not MLK either. I don't think there would have been Chappaquiddick. I think all these things are connected. The 1960s might have been something completely different. We don't know. I think all that was precipitated by JFK because, however you look at it, if you look back at history, I think you could make the argument that on November 22nd, 1963, if you look at a graph, that America was at the apex in terms of culturally, socially, economically, militarily. We had the respect of the world. We had a vibrant economy. And I think, however you look at it, our innocence really did die. It sounds cliche, but I think it did. And since that moment, I think it's been a steady line downwards in every way with America. I think that we'll, can never reach the greatness we had on November 22nd, 1963. And I think we need to know why. The President of the United States, that's supposedly the most powerful man in the free world. And if they could kill him and lie about it and get every part of our society, the entire mainstream media, people don't realize, as I talked about in Hidden History, NBC News, one of the three networks you had at that time, they agreed in writing, and I published it in Hidden History, to only report what the FBI approved. And this was like 2 days after the assassination, so they let them know we're not going to do any investigation. The FBI is going to feed us our information, and we're going to do it. And you can still see that in everything that happens now. You can see the media; they're just reporting what the authorities tell them to report.
And whether you agree with Garrison or not, there's memos talking about shooting down Garrison. That's quoted in a document for NBC. or one of those giant news networks. And again, that's a targeted effort against the media to not enhance or not talk about certain, other alternative theories based on the assassination. There are a lot out there. I've kind of I guess walking into this, you kind of hear the gambit like it was because of the Vietnam War that needed to happen. It was the military industrial complex, and Kennedy was going to put a stop to all that. You hear things about LBJ, which, again, I'm not as convinced as a lot of people are on the LBJ factor. I think there's a lot of things that can be easily excused with LBJ. He just seemed like a selfish politician that only cared about domestic problems. And when he got thrown into the Vietnam War, you kind of see his change go like, why the fuck are we even over here? Like he's questioning it himself. I have those, whether he's again, the LBJ phone calls is what I'm referencing. But if you mention those, people say, well, he knew he was being recorded. I was like, yeah, but did he ever think they were going to be released? Because Hoover gave testimony to the Warren Commission, and LBJ was going to hide that. But then Hoover leaked it to, what is it, Jeremiah O'Leary, and Jeremiah O'Leary put it in the press because he was an FBI plant. So it was like,
Mockingbird. Yep.
You have so much going on. And again, I wanted to have you on here to kind of discuss some not so much evidence on the actual assassination, because I feel like we focus a lot on the who and then the why of the matters, but just where it's like clear, as Doug Horne said in that second JFK interview, that if you have a lone nut kill the president, you have the autopsy change 4 times in 2 weeks. That doesn't happen. There was obviously way more evidence of a cover up that was in place, whether it was covering their own self deficientness and whatever was going on. But one that's very clear, we can take a good example at this episode. I wanted to have you on because it's you and Vince that really kind of talk about the Secret Service as much. Other researchers kind of find it interesting, but that's not their focus. But you have a knowledge on it. The Secret Service aspect. Now, I want to get your take on the Secret Service. Obviously, there's things that you've discovered. There's things that you can easily know about the case where the Secret Service was at fault. I want you to kind of give me your breakdown of the Secret Service and with the JFK assassination.
Well, I think that, and you're right. Vince Palomero, my friend, is in great work, and I give him credit for it all. He's the man on the Secret Service. I've done what I can. I think I'm probably second to him in terms. I don't focus on one thing like he does, but I think it's if you're conducting a criminal, Sherlock Holmes was on the case that day. I think the first thing you would have looked at is, okay, what obviously happened here. The Secret Service is supposed to protect the president. You're watching what film we have of the assassination. Now, that's another thing to discuss, why we don't have professional film of the assassination, why the press car was back in a bus instead of filming it from in front, as they did in every other motorcade. And Vince confirmed that to me. Every other motorcade he studied, the press car was right there, so we would have had close-up footage of whatever happened to JFK. Not that day. That's why when you see them, you see the camera shaking and everything, the guys are running from the bus when they're getting the first footage afterwards. But we have obviously, if their job is to protect the president, he had about 6 seconds. I mean, 6, maybe a little bit more of that from the first shot to the last, and there's no response. I mean, Clint Hill, as you mentioned before, he belatedly jumped up after the damage that was done, but it was too little, too late. From the first shot, first of all, the driver, William Greer, who in an investigation, he would have been the first one questioned, because his actions are so we don't know about shadowy figures behind the fence and all that, but we can see the driver of the limousine not do his job to slow down. You had 57 witnesses unconnected to each other that all said the motorcade stopped or almost stopped. Now they're all mistaken, of course, just like all the people that saw the big blowout in the back of JFK's head at Parkland. They were all mistaken the exact same way.
It wasn't until the Knicks film we noticed that there was the red lights that popped up on the tail
Yes,
lights.
yeah, that was from that's the Knicks film, yeah, where you can see that they had the brake lights, and of course you have all the people saying, like Doug Horne, that these films have been altered in some way. And again, we don't have professional footage. All we have is this. So we have these 3, kind of, and we don't know where the Babushka lady film is. Again, a real investigation. They would have tried to find out who that person was. Hey, I don't know who this woman is filming, but she's got the closest vantage point of anybody. Still don't know who she is, really. I mean, Beverly Oliver, I don't know, but we don't know where the film is. But at any rate, so you would have looked at Greer, and he would have been grilled relentlessly. Okay, and he would have showed the Zapruder film in Congress when they held hearings, real hearing, how, Warren Commission, whatever investigation you had, if it was done honestly, you said, Mr. Greer, explain what's going on here. And then you would have shown what the critics showed, how he actually turns around and watches JFK's head get blown off. And says, "Is this what you're training? Aren't you, told at the sound of gunfire that you're supposed to accelerate out of there quickly?" And then you would have said Roy Kellerman, who's sitting next to him, in the seat. Roy Kellerman's responsibility was to jump over that bumper seat where Connally's were and spread eagle and knock Kennedy down and protect him. He didn't move an inch. And you could look back at JFK's limousine and show that Rufus Youngblood, who held the same position with LBJ as Kellerman did with Kennedy, he instinctively acted right away, knocked LBJ down and did his job. So you say, why didn't you do what Rufus? Aren't you trained to do that? And then you would have found out that they had drank alcohol the night before until apparently 6 in the morning or something, and all these agents were involved. And you would have said this breaks precedent. So I mean, you're building a case right there of incredible, at least negligence. And then if you could find Abraham Bolden anywhere, if you knew about him and bring in and talked about how all these agents were kind of good old boys who didn't like Kennedy. Most of them weren't that fond of him. And so they might not necessarily been really motivated to protect him to begin with. So you would have, they didn't take the plot in Chicago seriously and things like that. So, that's what I think a real investigation would have done because, as Senator Ralph Yarborough said, at the time, this is a senator, he said, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but the Secret Service ought to be looked at here. He said, a man can run 50 yards in 6 seconds. These agents didn't act at all. And he said, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I think that was the problem. Nobody wanted to hurt anybody's feelings, but you're conducting an investigation. And you have to find out. You say you look back. If we had the film that Vince Palermo later found of, I think Vince disagrees. He thinks it's Don Lawton. I think it's Henry Ripka. And I was the first one through my friend William Law and I. We're the ones to contact. Vince never did, but to Ripka's family, and had very interesting conversations with them. People can read it in history. But you see that footage at Love Field, which is the end of the professional footage. That's where the professional footage ends. Once the motorcade starts, it's nothing but home videos. But you can see the guy throwing up his hands like, the fuck? Like say, what are you doing? Like he's obviously being told because he's starting to jog alongside the limo, which you saw in most of these motorcades. You had agents jogging alongside the rear wheel of the car, and in front of this front wheel. They surrounded it, and this was again to further protect the president. It's obviously harder to shoot him if they have an agent right there. Not that day. And this guy was obviously not in on whatever, secret was going on because he's frustrated. He's throwing his arms up and saying, why? And you can see Emory Roberts, who again, Emory Roberts would have been the second one question because he was the one in charge in the motorcade of the detail. And he can be seen waving him off. And that's what you would, if they had that footage, you would have said, okay, what's going on here? Who is this agent? Why is he doing this? It looks like he's getting a last minute notification not to be jogging alongside the motor. Why are you waving him off? And then let Emory Roberts explain. And then later, we know that Jack Reddy, one of the only agent on the presidential backup car where Clint Hill was, he was the only one who actually attempted to do his job. Clint Hill was too little too late. Reddy tried to jump off and Roberts waved him off and waved him back. So there's two instances that Emory Roberts has to explain what's going on there. The president is being shot at, and you are stopping the only agent. And why are the other agents, sitting there? Why aren't they doing it? They're all kind of sitting around and looking around in circles like they're spectators. So I think they bear the most obvious responsibility for letting it happen. Now, I'm not saying that the Secret Service, the plot to kill him, was in this. I don't think the Secret Service plotted to kill him. But clearly, there's a possibility. And I know you want to discuss James Rowley, who was the director of the Secret Service, but wasn't in Dallas, so he could always kind of distance himself. So, well, Forrest Sarles was in Dallas, and he was the head of the office there, and of course Emory Roberts but they wanted to deflect attention away from Roberts. But the only thing I think it's possible, and especially in more recent events where we hear so much about false flags and crisis actors and stuff, and then these things exist. But you could make an argument that if the Secret Service is looked at in an innocent light, that they were told, and some people believe that there was going to be some kind of simulated assassination because Kennedy wasn't taking, his protection seriously. I'm just speculating here, but some people have speculated and this is maybe why they didn't react. Now, and then what were they going to do afterwards? I mean, nobody. It's kind of like TWA Flight 800. If the Navy shot that down, they weren't afterwards going to say, "Oh yeah, well we accidentally did that." Of course, if that was the case, they're going to say, "Well, they probably didn't know what to do." So that's one way to look at them innocently, but I really don't know.
Well, you got a channel. You talk about things on your channel. I'm sure you've gotten this comment before. You've gotten seen similar people saying things like this in comments on Facebook or any of the forum groups, even if you bother just checking it if you don't want to go on it. The Secret Service agent did it. I saw the video of him turning around and shooting JFK in the head. I would like you to debunk the George Hickey thing and try and debunk the video. The video, the Zapruder film is filmed, so it's up and down. It's how it's motioned. Even if it's cleaned up all the way, the film, you still see it go up and down because it's on a reel. That AI thing of the driver turning around and shooting, it's AI because it's smooth. It's like an HD like camera or something. It doesn't vibe. But I want you to talk about the driver thing because you've mentioned a couple things, and then we're going to kind of mention. I kind of want your perspective on if you think that there was likely involvement as an aspect of like they were in on the assassination. I mean, again, drinking, that could be, plausible deniability. If you're just going to drink and then just not do anything or not be able to react, technically you're not lying when you say that, I didn't have time. Look, it's a short amount of time for those shots to go off. So I don't think, it's going to be possible for them to stop a bullet or even really do anything, but they didn't do anything at all. That's the thing, is that it actually might have cause more problems with the stopping of the car and things of that sort. So maybe you can discuss some of the driver theory did it and then some of the George Hickey stuff.
Yeah, well, and that's unfortunate. And it's Bill Cooper who wrote "Behold a Pale Horse," which is kind of a well-known book in the conspiracy world. And he was I liked a lot of things about him, and he later retracted it. But yeah, this as I've tried to tell people, look, I think a lot of bad things about William Greer. I think he had, again, unless it was a simulated assassination. Bill Greer's son, Vince, talked to his son years later, and the conversation was very revealing, where he mentioned something that he just said, like the guy hesitated, and he goes, "Well, Kennedy was a Catholic and we were Protestant." Like, what kind of an answer is that? So what? You didn't like him, so you wanted to be so that it's a very strange conversation Vince had with him. But I don't think, first of all, just why would you trust it? Greer was an older guy. He was one of the oldest drivers they had. I don't know, 50 some years old or something. Most of them were younger. Why would you trust somebody like that to be? You're going to have the driver shoot through the Connollys, Jackie next. I mean, that's, talking about hiding in plain sight. I think it makes very little sense to do that. And but again, and the Hickey thing is even more ridiculous. If the Secret Service accidentally shot him or whatever, it's just,
Now, look, there
more.
is an account on that day where Johnson was almost shot by a Secret Service agent when he was leaving I don't know if it was his house or some type of thing. There was an instance, but it was at night or something like that, and the person just thought it was couldn't tell it was LBJ or not, just thought it was a random person. I don't know if he left the hotel early. I have no clue. But there is an account of that happening, so it's not like it's the Secret Service might just be, crappy. I think a lot of this is propaganda. We were told so much by like Hoover's FBI on movies and screens to be like these professionals, these perfect people. And we're shown it all the times in movies that the Secret Service is like this epic group. And they're not like that at all. Actually, a lot of them have drinking problems. I mean, you can hear Malcolm Kilduff in an interview explain his whole drinking problem and how this is just common for people involved in Washington politics. So again, this might just be a bunch of people in their 20s who were just more obsessed with drinking than they were about doing their actual duty. I think Clint Hill was probably the most responsible of the group. Abraham Bolden was probably another one. But even like Clint Hill, he drank, but he just set his alarm to get him up at 6 a.m., even though he got home at like 2 a.m. So maybe we can also discuss the drinking issue as well, too. You mentioned that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, and I think it's, again, it wasn't really investigated. Even Earl Warren had, was kind of said something about, this was, hey, look, this should be looked into. They were out drinking. So did that dull their reflexes? I don't know. But as you said, I think that's kind of, if you have a plot to kill the president and you're going to involve the Secret Service, I don't think you're going to necessarily rely on, well, okay, we'll make sure that guys go out and drink late, and then hopefully they'll react. I mean, how can you rely on that? Maybe they all won't go out. Maybe someone will do the job. So, but I think that when you talked about Secret Service agents, that's what, in fact, when I talked to Henry Ripke's granddaughter, that's the first thing she said. And there were lots of early reports about a Secret Service agent being shot that day. The early reports are replete with that. So something was, and then you had the pool of blood over by the Pagoda that again's never been explained. One of these guys came by, and, I guess this is what you did back in those days. I mean, nowadays we'd be more, but he actually reached out and tasted it. Imagine tasting a thing to say it's blood. But
It was
again, that was,
Jerry Coley and Jim Hood. Jim Hood reached down and licked the blood and said it was blood. And then Jerry Coley's photos were taken by two FBI agents.
Yeah, and then later, if they mention it at all, they claim it was soda pop or something like that, or that a couple. So, but so something's there, because you had accounts. Secret Service agent was killed, and the reports of the blood by Coley and this. And so, what was real? So this could be, that could have arisen out of that. But again, if you'd only had we never. That's what I try to stress to people all the time. The crime, this thing has never been investigated. It wasn't investigated then. It never. I mean, just the fact that if you look at what they investigated, I mean, they had, for instance, they had. I think it's up to 6 independent witnesses now. By the time the ARB came, a couple more of them came out in the 90s. First it was Roger Craig, and there's a bunch more of them who all reported the same thing, that someone resembling Lee Harvey Oswald came running down the embankment and getting into a Nash Rambler station wagon right after the assassination. So that's the lead you go with. But instead that was ignored. It was suppressed. Some of that testimony, corroborating evidence, didn't come out to the 90s, and they went with this ridiculous scenario where he walked away from the scene with, again, no evidence. He's not caught in any film. All the pictures and films was taken.
Just to help you out here, it's Roger Craig, Lillian Hefner, Marvin C. Robinson, Roy Cooper, and Richard Carr. I have those on my channel clip form from their testimony of seeing a Nash or some type of Rambler station wagon and a person that resembled Oswald get into it. So I'm just backing you up here on that one, because that is,
No, I
again,
appreciate it.
that's another thing that is out there that I feel like a lot of people that are commenting things like the driver did it and all this never have probably either come across. And again, I'm not debunking or trying to say, I'm just saying, if you really examine the Secret Service, if you take it back here, James Rowley, for instance, Warren wrung him out for his Secret Service agents. He said, "Hey, man, don't you think that the Secret Service agents drinking was a problem that could have led to their delayed reaction time?" And Rowley said, "Yeah, but he didn't want to tarnish the reputations of them, what they could do to their families by firing them. So he kind of just wiped it off, even though it's an automatic dismissal." Another one is the driver throwing up his hands when he's called off the presidential car. People always bring up all the time that JFK didn't want it to be closer to the crowd. He didn't want the Secret Service in the
Yeah,
way.
that's what they say. Yeah, yeah.
Again, there's the testimony of John Connolly stating that he was at one incident in the motorcade while they were driving, is that 4 times JFK had to tell Jackie to take her sunglasses off because he wanted the press to see them. That backs up that point. But what doesn't back up that point is the fact that the Secret Service was already running towards people in the crowd and pulling children and stuff away from the motorcade as they were trying to approach it before Dealey Plaza even happened. There was multiple instances where the Secret Service seemed like they were on their game, doing everything they possibly could to make sure that JFK was safe. So,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
yeah, and you have the testimony again. Vince Palermo talked to almost all these guys, pretty much all, and to a man is, and that's what he published in Survivor's Guilt. They all said JFK never interfered with their duties. Now later they would lie, and Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill, both in self-serving books that were published much later. They would contradict what they told Vince and what they said earlier, and act like he was reckless, and maybe again, it was an attempt. It's an attempt to blame JFK for his death. Well, he was reckless. He wouldn't let them do their job, and he deserved it anyhow because he wasn't any good. He was a womanizer, and he wasn't going to get us out of Vietnam. That's the basically the mantra that's being pushed. But these guys all said, even though we know some of them didn't like JFK, but they all said, no, he let us do their job. He never interfered with us. And you can see in during the Clint Hill is riding the bumper of the car, and even a couple turns before the fatal turn, even he's during that motorcade. And in other motorcades, you would see him or someone else riding that bumper constantly. And again, having people say, so, why? But then they backed off by the time they got to the kill area. Everything was wide open. Then you have other things like, for instance, why was there such a sparse population there in Dealey Plaza where he was shot? I mean, you look at the crowds; we all know them, especially on the one side of the street. It was just Gene Hill and Mary Mormon and Charles Brad, just a few people that were there. But if you look up until that point, you have like 5 and 6 deep rows of people all lining the streets. So why, it's almost like, was somebody preventing people from getting in there? I wonder about that kind of stuff. But these things should have been investigated, but any investigation should have started with the Secret Service. They were entrusted to, and we can see parallels, for instance, in Butler, Pennsylvania, where people talk about. So I'm no fan of the Secret Service because you saw what happened there. I don't know, and they've got millions of people that believe it wasn't even a real assassination attempt, and there are questions about it. But clearly they didn't do their job either. They left him completely unprotected. They let him rise up, and nobody was in front of them. And you can see them kind of looking around like they're befuddled. And you had witnesses telling him this guy's scaling a building, and they did nothing. So a lot of parallels there, really. And I thought maybe that would bring some more attention to it, but instead, it's just kind of swept under the rug.
What do you think should have been done to the Secret Service after the assassination and they found out all these deficiencies going on with the agency?
Well, I think I don't know that if you would necessarily fire them, but um, for the drinking, anyhow, because I think it would have to be, was this something that the was kind of just a wink and a nod where it happened all the time, and it was maybe it was it was supposed to be a regulation, but they didn't really pay attention to it. That's what I suspect. But so I think that but when you look at certainly Emory Roberts, his action should have been looked. I think he should have been reprimanded. I would have fired him. Explain why you waved that guy off at the airport. Explain why you waved Jack Reddy off during the motorcade. That's what I would have done, and I would have everybody on that backup detail. I would have explain how you had 6 seconds to react. What are you trained to do when you hear that was obviously gunfire? So and then of course William Greer, the first one, William Greer obviously would be fired because at the very least he was incredibly incompetent. But Jackie Kennedy would later allude that to that herself, or say that driver, he said basically the maid could have done a better job or something like that. And everybody understood that. But an investigation that doesn't even hold the Secret Service accountable, and it really didn't. And then later they allowed somebody like Clint Hill, who for years was supposedly so emotionally torn up about it he couldn't talk about it. And then later he couldn't stop talking about it when he met this Lisa McCubbin, this much younger woman who was obviously a gold digger. And they published two or three, I think two books maybe, very self-serving that portrayed him in a fantastic light, and again made it Kennedy look like he was really hard to protect because he wanted to be so close to the people and we couldn't stop him and all that kind of stuff. So basically that's what happened. And but they kind of made a hero out of him. And I don't think any of those guys should have been heroes. And any investigation should have started with the Secret Service. You go from there, but you figure out, okay, because whatever conspirators are behind the scenes, the Secret Service allowed it to happen. If they had done their job, the first shot we know either missed Kennedy or hit him in the throat, and it was non-fatal. So if they had simply done their job, if they had rushed it, they could have easily traversed that 20 feet or whatever it was in a couple seconds and knocked Kennedy on, he would be alive. I don't know what his injuries would have been, but he would be. So they could have saved his life. They didn't do that, and again, I think they bear the responsibility. They should be, and they weren't questioned about it at all. Nobody questioned them. And again, part of it was because nobody wanted to see the evidence. So they weren't really looking at the Zapruder film or anything. So they were kind of going by what officials were telling them. But if they had looked at the evidence, they probably still would because they were covering up. But that's where I think the investigation should have started with the Secret Service.
I'm going to ask you some questions based on James Rowley HSCA testimony that kind of, I think you probably listening to me asking you the question, you'll laugh, but this is kind of what the things that they brought up was. When they were asked about the agent's reaction time, James Kelly gave a really, or not James, no, James Rowley gave a very funny answer to it and said that he thought his agents reacted fast. And you can tell by some things of the Zapruder film, but I don't know how much the Zapruder film will show. But you have Clint Hill that obviously reacted quickly and hopped onto the back of the limousine, which I think looking at the case, you understand he was like the only one that really did anything. And then he also said, I don't think the Zapruder film shows this, but there was doors being flung open by Secret Service agents getting out of the car, ready to run up to. He's kind of rationalizing it. But one thing that was brought up was by, I think it's Ford Sr. of the HSCA asking James Rowley if he thought there was international involvement, because James Rowley immediately started to wanting to close off the border from Texas to Mexico, or just that little area right there. And Rowley explained that at first, I think a whole thing of things go through your mind, and you kind of have to suspect that there might have been foreign involvement, but they never pursued any angles. They also never told the Warren Commission about other assassination plots that they had documented. So again, they withhold information from the Warren Commission as to their investigation. Where do you think, besides just the motorcade, the actual event, What do you think about some of the responses I just listed, but also about their investigative practices? Because we know at the time there was three agencies doing an investigation. There was the FBI, the Secret Service, and the Dallas Police that were kind of combing through information and giving it to the Warren Commission. So the Warren Commission kind of had to sift through it and make a record of what they were doing.
Yeah, the Warren Commission did no investigating itself. They relied on the FBI, and the FBI was compromised. Obviously, in the beginning, we know how many witnesses, a bunch of witnesses would come forward later until Penn Jones and Mark Lane and people like that, that their statements weren't what they told the FBI. They've been altered. I think it was Julianne Mercer, I think, was the one who claimed that even her signature had been forged, and there was no notary on it. I mean, so they had, yeah, we had obviously Hoover was basically in charge of the cover up, and Harold Weisberg made a great deal in all of his books because he was going to court every day basically, and filing Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. And he talked about when he got these FBI memos, I'm publishing them as I have them, because they would purposely Xerox them to make them almost illegible. So they would Xerox them repeatedly. And that's why if you look at some of these memos, like, what the hell is wrong with them? Because that's what they did. Now, and I think in more recent years, they've been able maybe to find some of these original ones. But originally, people like Weisberg, if you look at his books, that's the kind of quality you get. And I remember being a young guy and being impressed with how obviously that is not something benign. That is something, if you don't want people to be able to read. That's aside from the redactions are already redacted. But if you just imagine that any company that you want a copy of something and you repeatedly Xerox it so that it's not as illegible, and that's what the FBI did. And but again, people. That's why the critics were the only ones. People like Harold Weisberg and Lane, they were writing about this. The New York Times wasn't. The Washington Post wasn't. You mentioned Jeremiah O'Leary, who was an asset, and with the Post, you had George Largo Jr., who was a Mockingbird asset as well. And so that's what you were dealing with. Is it? And you look at that 1967 memo from the CIA, and it details what they wanted them to do, and they did it.
What do you think about obviously we talked about the drinking, but would you be surprised to know that this was common problems for LBJ with the Secret Service as well, too? That a few times he had to either ring up James Rowley, ring out the Secret Service, or he had I don't know if you've heard the name Floyd Boring. He's another person that LBJ had to talk to on the phone about not keeping a secret that they're going to go and publicize and talk about what his route's going to be and where he's going. And it seems like he can't catch a break. I'm mentioning all these because I'm going to end up playing you a whole list of things and then have you kind of talk about them after I play them just so you can get their reaction. But I mean, would you be surprised to find out this wasn't just a JFK issue? This was an issue that LBJ had to face with them as well?
Well, I'm never surprised at the incompetence of law enforcement and Secret Service and law enforcement. So yeah, I'm not necessarily surprised at that, but I do know that Rowley and Robert Morrow. Robert Morrow is what he is. I mean, he's kind of he's an interesting character, and he comes up with some good things. But he's kind of LBJ centric, so he's focused on him. But he claimed that after the assassination, that Rowley had no power at all. And he had to clear everything through Rufus Youngblood. Rufus Youngblood was in de facto charge because that was the guy that saved LBJ's life, and LBJ loved the guy, and according to LBJ. But I don't know if you knew that or not. But so I don't know how much power Rowley even had because of that. It doesn't necessarily exculpate Rowley, but yeah, I mean, what you're telling me, I not necessarily, have necessarily heard that before. But I mean, we saw, like I said, with Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, they certainly weren't doing their job then. So I'm no fan of the Secret Service. I'm not sure that they maybe have ever done their job in terms of when there's a real assassination attempt. I'm not talking about Squeaky Fromm or the other one that supposedly tried to kill Ford, but yeah, I have not heard that about LBJ and the Secret Service.
You mentioned about Rufus Youngblood. Now, I do have a couple clips on that, surprisingly. It's from January 6th, 1964. He's talking to Rufus Youngblood, and he's talking that a top Kennedy aide apparently had talked about something or said some dissent about LBJ or something like that, or LBJ complaining that they're too close or something of that sort. And he just sat there like, I'll take Hoover's request of him giving me men, and I'll take all those guys' resignations. He was very pissed off. Rufus Youngblood was like the closest one to LBJ. You can see in a lot of photos. There's a lot of him watching over. But he was very pissed off at that too. He honestly didn't think the Secret Service could protect him over anything. He made a comment about Kennedy in it as well too. Like couldn't protect Kennedy. What makes you think they're going to be able to protect me? So this is something I'm going to play as well too. But with the James Rowley thing, I mean, he had Thomas Kelly go down there to Dallas because he was the closest one, he stated, and do this investigation for the Secret Service. He watched Marina. He's in photos of Marina holding her baby, walking down the front steps. And then you see him right in the background. He's there when Oswald's being interrogated. He also explains that I didn't think to grab an interrogation thing or device to record Oswald's interrogation. One of the biggest problems in this case is that we don't know what was said. We have notes to go off of, but it's just the notes of a police officer that could have been corrupt and could have been leaving out some key details. So I want to get your thoughts on the not recording of the interrogation. I mean, James Rowley explained it like, well, maybe Kelly didn't have the funds to get a recorder from some. I'm like, what do you mean doesn't have the funds? Did the Secret Service not get paid? Which is another thing he complained about later in his testimony, that maybe if we had the proper funds. But then a lot of his testimony was really focused on how the Secret Service is different. We do drills now. We do all these types of things. And you'd be pretty shocked to see how much we've changed since that one instance. But it's a little too late because JFK's dead. But there were certain protocols now, I think, that the Secret Service does that is different than what happened in 63 that they didn't do before. But I wanted to kind of get your opinion on the not recording the interrogation.
Yeah, well, I think, and most people, that was one of the first things that drew my attention as a teenager when I first started studying these things in the mid 70s. And the fact that, and most of the time they questioned the Dallas police. Apparently nobody between the Dallas police, the FBI, and the Secret Service, apparently there wasn't a tape recorder anywhere around. They didn't have it in the budget, which, as people have pointed out, all those unrecorded interrogation sessions, once Oswald, if he ever got an attorney, none of those things could have been used against him because they'd all be hearsay. They weren't recorded. I mean, Will Fritz's Captain Fritz produced some very belated notes. If you remember, there were more notes came out but probably the 90s. Before that, we had kind of a scribble scrabble. But I mean, that would be laughed out of court, of an honest courtroom anyhow. So yeah, I was always very suspicious of that. This is one of the most important criminals, potential criminals of the century. You would want to record that because if you're building a case against him, you're going to want to use because I mean he didn't clam up and say no. I invoked the fifth. I want to talk to a lawyer. He did keep saying he wanted to talk to a lawyer, but he also talked to them. So he potentially incriminated himself, and they had nothing. How are you going to prove that? He said, I never said that. That's the whole idea of why you had recordings. But yeah, it's very suspicious, of course.
I'm going to play some of these clips I've been mentioning throughout. We're going to kind of cover everything we kind of just talked about. And again, feel free to comment after one of the clips over with before I play another one, just in case if you have any opinions. You might not have heard it before. You might have heard it already. But it's only going to back up what we're talking about here because obviously us just saying it, people go, oh, yeah. Do you find it that a lot of people reference things that are from like a book that someone wrote and it's like there's not really any evidence? Like I get a bunch of stuff, whether it's LBJ related or whether it's even the Secret Service related, where I'm like, there's not really any evidence of that besides it being in that one book that you're mentioning that I don't think a lot of people have really read.
That happens a lot, yes.
I'm going to let's start off with the Secret Service drinking issue. This is Thomas Kelly. So Thomas Kelly was the person that James Rowley, the person we've been talking about for anyone listening, sent to Dallas because he was the closest one to kind of do his own investigation. He didn't really have any proper protocols of what to do. It was kind of just go down there. Now, he is one of the people that told Chief Curry, James Lavelle, and then I think Decker to stop talking to the press about certain statements. And that's when you see Curry stop talking. I think it was because he was mentioning things about the FBI, informing them on certain subversive peoples and people with this background that Oswald had, where he should have been on a list. And that's when you see like I think it's later that day, Curry makes another statement to the press and it's completely opposite, like someone had scared him straight. But I'm going to play this clip real quick.
Mr. Kelly, you were aware of an investigation concerning special agents who were alleged to have been drinking the night before and the morning before the assassination?
I'm aware of the inquiry, yes.
To your knowledge, were any of those agents found in violation of the Secret Service rules?
I don't think they were found in violation of any Secret Service rules warranting any action on them. It was an area of poor judgment, I presume, but there was no specific violation of any rule. And, of course, the inquiry indicated that their actions the night before had no bearing on what happened in Dallas.
So their action of drinking had no bearing of weight of what happened in Dallas. Now, look, that might be true when it came to just reacting to a shot. Again, you have a certain amount of seconds that you could have really reacted. I'm looking for the James Rowley version of this one. You have a certain number of seconds that you're able to react, obviously, when the shots go off. But drinking before, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure you've heard of it, is automatic cause for automatic dismissal from the Secret Service, if I'm not mistaken. You're not able to do your job properly if you're intoxicated. Have you? I mean, is that well known?
Well, I think so, and especially in a case like this, again, if they wanted to throw some scapegoats out there to take the blame, it would have been easy to just get rid of the Secret Service agents and say, and that to me would have been an innocuous thing. Well, they were drinking, it dulled their senses. That's why they didn't react, and that might be a way to try to explain away any big conspiracy. But they didn't attempt to do that. They instead, protected everyone involved. And I think they created more suspicion by doing that, because again, I think if they had just gotten rid of it, it would have looked like maybe, okay, this was the problem. They probably could have saved him if they hadn't have been drinking it, but they didn't do that. Instead, they didn't want to punish anybody, and they did not punish a single agent.
I'm going to play this one, which is the agent's reaction time. This was asked by Sawyer of the HSCA. He has the funniest one because he always has that weird accent, but tends to be very blunt with his questioning. But he's talking to now James Rowley, the head person of the Secret Service, about the agent's reaction time.
Well, as I said to a previous witness, I have been very impressed in watching the Zapruder film, the slowness of the reaction of the agents compared to the reaction of Governor Connolly. And I think for anyone watching that, it's perfectly obvious that they were not really alertly attuned to the possibility of some catastrophic event like that happening. And I just wonder if there's been some effort to, in effect, instill an approach that instead of it being the unexpected, it's the expected, and they're just waiting for it to happen, which might have increased their reaction time and might have saved the president.
I think there's an exhibit from the Warren Commission that shows that one of the cars had the door swung open apparently after the first shot, in which two agents were attempting to get out at about that time, which may not have been in the Zapruder film.
Now, I'm going to state that real quick. There is no way to prove that, and there is no way to say that it is inaccurate, because we do not have anything but the Zapruder film to really look after. We have pictures, but of that specific moment of the door swinging out, you're taking an account that's way after the fact, which could just be rationalizing the fact that they didn't react enough in time. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it sounds good if you're listening to it there and you're asking questions.
Well, what I would say, what door are you referring to? Because the people that were the presidential detail for JFK was right behind him, maybe 10, 15 feet away. You can see they were close. And all those people were standing on the except for Roberts and the driver, they were standing on the bumper. So the people that would have reacted, and they did that on purpose so they could jump at the sign of trouble. So there was no door to be opened. So I would ask the guy, what door are you referring to? What car? The Secret Service detail was right there. Those are the ones who were tasked with protecting the president. They didn't have to open a door. All they had to do is jump from the thing and run for a couple seconds, and they would have been there. So that's why I would have asked him that.
Well, even with Kellerman sitting up front, him being able to turn around and jump back, I think the only reasonable excuse I heard was Connolly talking about that it would have been difficult because they had that. Again, sometimes people think there's two rows of seats. It was just Connolly, Nellie, JFK, and Jackie, but they forget about the front. There's that metal bar that goes up and over. So again, that would have been difficult to maybe jump back, but he still never attempted to even move or do anything like that. I think Connolly just stated that Kellerman said we need to get out of here or something of that sort. And then that's when the car sped off. But this is talking about Clint Hill with the reaction time.
We did receive reports from time to time on Dallas, but specifically, what report are you referring to?
Well, did you receive a report indicating how the agents had performed at the time that the shooting episode occurred in Dealey Plaza?
Well, we found out the report indicated that they performed adequately under the circumstances. Their response is indicated by the action of Agent Clint Hill, indicated that he responded and that he was attempted to take some action.
Did you play any role in supervising the investigation itself?
No, sir.
Again, just Clint Hill's reacting now. I mean, again, you can't rely the whole Secret Service weight on one man. But I want to do, this was kind of, I'm going to get to the driver aspect here. So James Rowley started to excuse the driver. Then I'm going to play Thomas Kelly talking about the driver as well, too. And this would be William Greer, the guy you had mentioned before. And again, I think it's important to mention something we've mentioned in the past, was that there was another person that usually drove JFK's limousine on certain trips. But I think a month and a half before he died at Fort, blanking on the name of it.
Of Camp David. And so I don't know that, to my knowledge, I don't know that there's ever been another death that has occurred at Camp David. It got very little, Vince talked a lot about, I think it's Thomas Shipman was his name, and he was very young. I think he was in his 30s, I think, and he had a heart attack, maybe 40, but he was very young. And that's, kind of been glossed over. Vince talked about it, and he also talked about, I have more about that in American Memory, on the name escapes me, but there was I believe he was 28 years old, and he was said to be JFK's favorite guy on the honor guard. And he died of a heart attack, supposedly at 28. There's a whole thing in the American Memory Hall, go into that in detail about his family and lots of strange. Bill Kelly is a researcher that did some work on that as well. But there's a lot going on there that, just kind of connected to the Secret Service and the honor guard, because the honor guard would also be upset when JFK's, I think, what was the guy's name? Sam, I can't think of his name, but he was personally offended because when the body came to Andrews Air Force Base afterwards, it was the honor guard's obligation to remove the body, and the Secret Service waved them out of the way and said, "No, we're doing it." And they had to watch them jostle actually damage the coffin. They were so careless with it. So lots of strange stuff were going on.
I think it's Malcolm Kilduff who states that when the Secret Service were threatening or just trying to get the body out of Dallas, there was like a body check or a body blow, he states. But then did you know Jesse Curry was the one that told them that they could take the body and fully gave it permission to release? Because Malcolm Kilduff states that. And then also Jesse Curry's on Air Force One when Johnson's being sworn in.
Yeah, no, yeah, I didn't know he gave them permission, because I know that you had Earl Rose that tried to stop, very courageously tried to stop them, and he was right. I mean, they had jurisdiction over the body, but this was again
Earl Rose was right. He said that if it didn't happen here, he was afraid theories and all these types of things were going to spread, and he was very correct in that assumption.
Was he right? Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it was so ironic to see the Secret Service, who sat there dull as can be, and to put it kindly, didn't react and didn't do their job, and let the president get assassinated, suddenly spring into action and get all tough. And I think one of the agents punched somebody out or something. They were pulling guns on people. They were acting, really, I think, over the top, in terms of, let's just get at it. And the whole thought was, we need to get him at it, because they blamed Dallas for the shooting, basically. And that happened in the last few years after that. The Kennedy people tended to blame the location, which is ridiculous. And so they just wanted to, the sooner we get out of here, the better. We want to spare Jackie. Jackie wants to get out of here. Okay, that's understandable. Her feelings, I understand that. But that doesn't mean you don't follow the law, and you have to protocol there. And what happened was, and that's why I said there's so many things that happened where the Secret Service didn't do their job, and then the body goes back, and you have David Lifton coming up with it, because there's lots of questions about that. All the people talk about seeing different types of coffins and body bags, and were they all lying? I don't know, but Lifton, made a lot out of that in best evidence. But however you look at it, as Harold Weisberg used to say, Kennedy got the president of the United States got an autopsy, unworthy of a Bowery bum. I mean, they found the Humes and Boswell. These were people who they didn't perform forensic gunshot autopsies. So you would think they would have found the most, the senior most, experts in this area as president, but he didn't do that. They got people, and then you had, you had Hume's burning his original autopsy notes in his fireplace at home. There's so many things that happen. Boswell's autopsy face sheet that just happens to show the location of the back wound, 5.5 to 6 inches down on the back, which discredits the single bullet theory. Well, he was mistaking. He wasn't meant to be precise. It was, so many things. And I remember reading this stuff as a teenager and just incomprehensible to me. God, the government can lie like this, and it had a huge impact on me. And obviously, made me the radical I am today. But yeah, there's so many things there. I don't know how anybody can not put this together. This is a huge, huge conspiracy.
So one of the things we mentioned was about the driver and the faults on the driver. This is James Rowley excusing the driver. Then I'll play Thomas Kelly, the one in charge of investigating for the Secret Service under James Rowley.
The driver is concerned, incidentally, it was an armored car, which carries considerable weight.
But with no top.
No top, no. But it's still heavy on the body, in the body. The motorcycles, when you're involved in one of those motorcades, and there are people shouting and acclaiming the individuals, and the motorcycles, at times they could slow down, then they have to kick the motor, and it explodes and so forth. These agents have been used to that. So that when the second shot went higher, they assume, because their concentration in the meantime is on the public and the people there, which may sometimes, they're oblivious of what the noise that's going on. In other words, to distinguish between a backfire and a rifle shot.
I mean, I've never heard any more today, Junior. Like it's obviously trying to rationalize, and he's in a bit of a pickle here because he is being put on the spot about the faults of the driver, and he can't really make an excuse, but he's trying his hardest. That's why he couldn't find if he was going to talk about the motorcycle backfires, if he was going to talk about, hey, how was it to be able to distinguish a shot? Well, for Mr. Sawyer, he was so mad that John Connolly immediately knew it was a shot, and the other agents didn't. That was his opening thing. That's what he was very interested in learning more about. They ended up having to take a break with it. And then I think it was Blakey who pulled Sawyer aside and pulled Stokes aside and said that they'll have to discuss it in a different session or something because they're limited on time. And again, at this point, this is towards the end of the HSCA. They still had plenty of time before even the audio was introduced. So again, here's going to be Thomas Kelly talking about the driver error. I haven't heard this one in a while, so I'm actually curious myself to what it is.
Have any conversation with the driver of the presidential vehicle?
No, I did not.
Did you review his conduct?
I reviewed his conduct, yes.
What did you understand his instructions were?
Generally, the instructions to the drivers of the car are to be prepared to get the president away from any dangerous situation.
Has the driver of the vehicle received any training in defensive driving or evasive driving?
Not in a formal sense. However, Mr. Greer, who was driving the president's car at that time, and the other drivers and the other agents who were assigned as drivers, long practice and history of driving the presidential vehicles.
Were there any tests available at the time to gauge and measure the reactions of those persons who were responsible for the close physical protection of President Kennedy?
I presume there were tests available. I'm not certain that any were given to these particular agents that were involved at this time of the assassination.
So did we just, I didn't mean to double click that. Did we just have a bunch of unprepared people that were doing something for the assassination? Are you not going to let me exit out of this? There we go.
That's what you would think. And they didn't even do something like, where they didn't do any kind of gobbledygook about, in light of what's happening, we're reassessing, we're increasing training, they didn't even do that. They didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing. You hear them. They just basically said, yeah, no problem. Yeah, they were out drinking, but I don't think they violated any rules. And yeah, I think I'm satisfied with the reactions. Clint Hill did react at some point, and there were some doors being opened by Secret Service agents somewhere. I don't know where. I mean, it's unbelievable. But again, Sawyer, that's about as hard as the questioning got. Certainly the Warren Commission was going to question it like that. You certainly going to have any of their counsel who are going to grill them.
Again, with the whole body of the car being too heavy that James Rowley was trying to talk about, I mean, that's just nonsense stuff. Even Sawyer was like, no top. Like if it's an armored car, it doesn't mean anything when there's no top. But he's like, yeah, but the weight of the car, it takes a while for it to accelerate. Well, from all accounts, once Bill Greer hit the accelerator, they were flying. So, I think it was a delayed reaction time. Maybe James Rowley was friends with Greer and he had a good relationship. I couldn't tell you. That was never explained, anything like that. All I can tell you is that when we're now going to examine kind of how I guess I'll play this one real quick. Now, this is Divine. He's talking about what could have caused something that could be now improved with the Secret Service to make sure that they're better situated for a circumstance like that.
You did testify before the Warren Commission, didn't you,
Yes, sir.
Rowley? Did you testify before any congressional committees in connection with this matter?
Yes.
1976, in February, I testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee, chaired by Senator Schweitzer.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you, as the former head of the Secret Service, have any thoughts that you would like to impart to this committee, in as much as the mandate of the House is that we make recommendations to the Congress in the area of possible legislation as it relates to assassinations? Do you feel that you would have been in better shape to have your agency handle it better if you'd had more laws at your disposal or more funds?
We didn't have the manpower or the equipment that we would have liked to have had. But I must say that since then, we have the manpower and the equipment.
So again, that's after the fact. Doesn't really help us now. Now I want to kind of get into when he requested Thomas Kelly go down there and kind of do this whole investigation and handling of the Oswald situation and stuff that came later when the Warren Commission was doing their investigation. And then I'll end with some LBJ stuff on the Secret Service and how it kind of transitioned into LBJ's presidency as well, too. This one's the Secret Service protocol for investigating. James Rowley's being questioned here.
Mr. Kelly's position on the chart have indicated that he had authority in the field office to direct that the agents conduct whatever investigation he felt was necessary.
Yes, sir, he had that authority.
Did you ever establish any other panel or reviewing board or authority for the Dallas investigation?
Offhand, I don't recall. Unless you have in mind what I heard this morning, that Mr. Kelly had a meeting in which they discussed the intelligence aspect of the service.
At the time of the assassination, had the Secret Service established any procedures for the handling of physical evidence?
Well, I think basically they handled the procedures as they would any other evidence, whether it be criminal or particularly in the criminal field.
Doesn't explain how did that procedure go? That's just next question, I guess. I want to play, working with Hoover. This is James Rowley talking about working with Hoover on their investigation.
In your meetings with J. Edgar Hoover, wouldn't it have been logical for you as chief of the Secret Service and he as head of the FBI to determine what strategy or plan you would have to investigate this death?
Yes, sir. Your earlier question was that before there was an opportunity for anybody to sit down, the President of the United States directed the FBI would conduct the investigation, and that we would cooperate with them in any manner and phase that we could. Now, I did indicate to the directorate at such meetings that we would cooperate with them. Now, they had their own strategy as to how they would investigate it.
Again, we're talking about the Warren Commission was going to boil down to the FBI report. Hoover thought his report was enough. He refused to give testimony to the Warren Commission, talked with LBJ about it. Then he was forced to give testimony to the Warren Commission, which wasn't going to be released, but Hoover released it himself through Jeremiah O'Leary of the Washington Star, because he was just pissed off that he had to be put in that situation. Ramsey Clark and I think LBJ talk about it on the phone about, we think Hoover leaked it to Jeremiah O'Leary. There's no other way that could have happened. Why would Hoover do that? But again, these agencies, and this is a big question, I think you've probably heard this one before. I've heard Malcolm Kilduff state that he doesn't think that there were just the magic bullet. Like, he doesn't believe that at all. But he does agree with the conclusions, and he believes that there was no conspiracy, because his first statement about that was the fact that if any conspiracy or anybody but Oswald would have popped up, the FBI or other agencies that were investigating would have uncovered it. Well, none of the agencies are talking to each other. They're all withholding information from each other. The Secret Service, at this point, we've learned, does not know what the hell there's even a game plan of what to do. So again, this is another area which I'm sure leads into bigger areas with the Warren Commission, but you've come across this, and this is, again, something that's fact-based. It's not like a giant conspiracy. It's just proven that these investigations weren't really investigations like you've been mentioning.
No, and that's Governor Connolly's position, a public position. Now, Gerald Celente is one of many who said in private, Connolly knew there was a conspiracy, but publicly he disputed the single bullet theory, but said, and did not realizing that without the single bullet theory, there had to be a conspiracy. And there are other people, Billy Hargis, who was a motorcycle officer that was splattered with blood and everything. He again disputed the single bullet theory, but said, "Oh no, Oswald did." Said just ignorance. They didn't understand the case. So unfortunately, that's a lot of what people have had to deal with. It. Yeah, they'll dispute the single bullet. I think Clint Hill did too. I mean, but they always come. But Oswald did it. It's like, what? What are you talking about? You don't understand the case. Was impossible. But that's the problem, is that you have people, some of them like Hargis and people like that. I don't think they were conspirators. They were just ignorant, and they were very interested. I guess they didn't want to be like Roger Craig. They wanted to keep their career in law enforcement going, so it was in their best interest to toe the party line. That's what people with any kind of power tend to do anyhow. They want to say the official story, and those crazy conspiracy theorists and commies or whatever you want to call them, they're just trying to cause trouble with this stuff.
I'm going to play this one, which was James Rowley's kind of instruction on really what to do when sending Thomas Kelly down there to investigate this thing.
Now, at the time of the assassination, had the Secret Service established any procedures for the handling of physical evidence?
Well, I think basically they handled the procedures as they would any other evidence, whether it be criminal or particularly in the criminal field.
Mr. Kelly mentioned that there was some confusion as to what...
I told you they didn't answer that one. I was like, what the fuck?
What authority did the Secret Service have to participate in the investigation?
Well, we were involved in the assassination. We had the responsibility of protecting the president, and the reason for my dispatching Mr. Kelly down there was to supervise that investigation, to ascertain as quickly as possible who was responsible and who committed the crime.
So
that may have been a Freudian slip. He said we were involved in the assassination. At one point.
I think he was just stuttering too bad. He seemed pretty nervous on a lot of this type of stuff. This one right here is about the audio of Oswald's interrogation. James Rowley again.
If you would have put yourself in Mr. Kelly's place, arrived in Dallas and went to the Dallas Police Department, sat in on several interviews with Lee Harvey Oswald, and in fact interrogated Mr. Oswald yourself, would you have tape recorded that conversation?
No, I don't know whether we had tape recorders, but I think you must recognize under the situation at that time that Mr. Kelly was rushed down there, and even if he had the funds to rent a tape recorder, I don't think he would have had the time to do so. And furthermore, I don't think that he would have anticipated the type of confusion that he encountered.
Would you have insisted that word for word verbatim be taken down by a court reporter?
If you could obtain one, I suppose you could, but in the confusion, no one had an opportunity to ask questions, because in addition to the people that he described there were also the press right beyond the perimeter trying to ask questions.
You couldn't have asked the press for one of their tape recorders for a minute just so they can kind of keep the historic record intact?
Couldn't find a tape recorder there.
And this one's going to be withholding the Cuban plot, and then I'm going to start playing the LBJ and his problem with the Secret Service, and then I'll kind of stop sharing here and we can talk a little bit more.
A series of reports, which testimony has indicated, involved the Secret Service investigation of the Cuban plot to assassinate the president. Were you aware of those reports during the course of the Warren Commission investigation?
No, I have no recollection.
Do you have any recollection of having reviewed those documents?
No, no, sir.
Okay.
You mean at that time or recently?
At the time that the documents were generated?
No,
Did you work out any agreement as to which files would be supplied to the Warren Commission?
that was left up to Inspector Kelly because he was the one most familiar with what documents.
So now he states that he didn't know about the Cuban plot. The guy, Matthew, who's asking the questions, then goes, I'd like to point you to Exhibit 104, Exhibit 107, JFK Exhibit 107. Do you remember signing this at the bottom? And he goes, it looks like I signed it, but I have no recollection of the document. So he signed the Cuban thing, the assassination plot or some type of thing about this, but he didn't remember it or maybe didn't even read it. That's true. But again, another fault with the whole Secret Service in general. Some people aren't paying attention to their job, doing their duties properly, and that's how we get into a situation. Now, this is LBJ talking to James Rowley on 5/13/64.
Just not to do that. Don't make any requests in my name unless I approve of it.
Yes, sir.
I just think it's outrageous. Another thing here, your damn Secret Service car stays up right behind me every trip, and you're going to kill more people than you save. It doesn't do any good to be right close to me. And all you're doing is running over little children, and you ran over a man's foot here. I'm writing him apologizing for breaking his foot. And some of your man's guns are going to go off and cause more danger than anything else. I wish you'd tell
There's
them
the
to stay
theory.
a little bit behind me so that they won't run over the people that try and shake hands with me.
Yes, sir.
I'm writing this fellow in Georgia. His name is Charles B. Wheeler. He's Assistant Chief of Police.
Charles B.
Secret Service car ran over him at College Park and broke his foot. It's now in a cast.
Right, sir.
So that's what I've been telling them about. They like to stay right in one foot of me, and I don't know why.
Yes.
And then this is a continuation of that conversation.
Charles B. Wheeler, he's Assistant Chief of Police.
Charles B.
Secret Service car ran over him at College Park and broke his foot. It's now in a cast.
Right, sir.
So that's what I've been telling them about. They like to stay right in one foot of me, and I don't know why.
Yes,
if they'd stay 30 yards behind, it'd be so much safer. When I'm driving, I stop in a hurry. They're liable to hit my bumper and break my neck,
Right.
but they won't be instructed to do it. And then Walter, I think, told you about all those men at the ranch, or I did.
Yes, sir. You did, sir. I got a
And
memory.
they've got 26 Mercury automobiles, according to Ford Motor Company, and they think it's outrageous. And the Republicans are going to be writing stories on it. You've had them at Fredericksburg for months, and we couldn't use them if we were down there.
I see. Yes, sir.
And you might need one or two when we go and pick them up in Austin, but I sure wouldn't have Ford stationing 26 there.
Right, exactly.
I haven't been home since before Easter.
That's right, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
And then this is one, I don't know if you've ever heard before. This is Floyd Boring. So he got a hold of Floyd Boring. It's about 2 minutes long. I'm going to play it through because I thought it was pretty interesting. But this is Johnson talking to Floyd Boring.
Who did you tell on Secret Service was going?
Floyd Boring. I want to talk to
Who is Floyd Boring?
He's one of Jim Rowley's men in the White House.
See if you can get the son of a bitch on the phone here. Those bastards. I'm going to have to quit telling you I'm going to.
Mr. Boring on the line.
Mr. Boring. Yes, sir. Why in the hell do I have to be humiliated by giving you all a day's notice I'm going to New York? You've had the mayor announce up there publicly now that I'm going. And I'm not going to tell you a goddamn thing because you all can't keep a secret. You've got to tell every cop in the world. Now, I'm going to start leaving at 4:30 in the afternoon if you keep doing me this way. How do you expect me to operate? The mayor got up and made a public speech today at lunch announcing my arrival in New York. And I told Jack Valenti to tell you all and keep it just as confidential as you can.
I know that, sir.
Oh, well, call the chief of police up there and tell him you down here got fired on account of it.
I certainly will.
And just tell him that we cannot do it. And if he wants to keep us out of New York, keep out. And quit announcing how many men he's assigning to me.
All right, sir. I'll do
It's causing trouble all over the country, and I'm just going to get a law passed or something. That by God will make it a felony for you fellas to tell this. All right, sir. I'll give you a little notice, and then you, by God, you just go wild. You'll have 5,000 up there standing man to man with a gun drawn and drawn. And it's the damnedest disgrace I ever saw with all those little tin soldiers lined up there. I asked Bob Wagner the other day, why have you got 200 men here at a helicopter? They're liable to fall down and let a gun go off and kill themselves. But
that's twice he fucking makes a statement like that.
Yeah, how about that?
I
Yeah.
wanted you all to have a chance to tell your wife or get a suitcase tonight if you need it, and then you all go tell them, and then they tell the mayor, and the mayor tells the world. I'm going to call. So I'm going to try to cancel my trip out. Tell him there's nothing definite on it at all, and that I'm in the humor of not going at all if you have to tell him. I'm sorry this and you just tell them, I'm sorry too, but it keeps happening. This is not the first time. Last time they had 5,000. They gave out an announcement, 5,000 police to guard me. I don't want stuff like that.
First of all, I love LBJ on the phone. It's just, I love his brash nature.
No, he's hilarious. Yeah.
I was listening to a call with him, and it's just LBJ echoing, and the other person's perfectly clear. And I'm like, how do I just clear up one person's sound? And then as I'm editing, trying to figure it out, I hear the guy just go, Mr. President, should I call you back at a different time? Are you preoccupied or something? He's like, nah, I'm just on the toilet, but you can keep talking to me. I'm like, Jesus. It's all the time he's echoing. He's in the bathroom.
He did everything in the toilet. Yeah, they claim about him.
I just told Rowley that to call all of them in and take any of them's resignation if they wanted to, and I'll be glad to have his if he wants it, or yours, or anybody else's. And if they don't want to handle it, we'll get the FBI to do it. I'm not going to have a car or a man that's got little enough judgment to be up to 50 feet of me, because I've had two members of my family that had their neck knocked out of joint because idiots follow them, and then when they stop in a hurry, they get their neck jumped out. And I did say that I was going to puncture the tire to try to impress on people who don't get it always the first time. So you get a hold of Rowley, and you all call a meeting of your group, and whatever you decide you want to do, if you want to resign, I'll be glad to accept it forthwith. Cut that down a minute. And if the Secret Service wants to go back to counterfeiting, they can go back to counterfeiting. And I'll get the FBI to just sign me a couple of men to stay by my side without all this goddamn big push.
Now, you hear that counterfeiting comment, right?
Mm-hmm.
What the hell was Abraham Bolden locked up for?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He was ratting on the Secret Service for doing this counterfeiting thing that was going on, and they all teamed up on him and got him locked up on trumped-up charges.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this is a continuation of that call.
Somebody came and talked to one of Kennedy's staffers. So you find out whose morale's low and get rid of the son of a bitch. And if the whole Secret Service is low, I'll tell Dillon the first thing in the morning that we'll just change the damn law in about 5 minutes and turn it over to the FBI, because Hoover thinks that I could be handled a lot better anyway. I don't want any of it. I think now's a good time after Dallas to make a change if they want to do it. Now, I thought I did pretty well after Dallas, and I thought I reflected credit on the Secret Service. I did my damnedest to compliment you and everybody else, but if the appreciation I get is going to be the articles like this, Kennedy people come in and tell me that their morale's at the lowest in the history, well, I'm not going to be run by them, you know that.
I do know it.
You get a hold of Rowley and you'll see who the hell's been bellyaching.
So he's talking about Dallas. It said establishment on the thing, but it was Dallas. He said after Dallas, I could have had the law changed, but I gave credit to the Secret Service for the actions that they did do, because obviously you need to keep the people's faith in the government that they can still protect and do things like that, because once that falls, it's like the domino theory. It all kind of falls. I played a lot of stuff for you here, a lot of stuff that we were already talking about and discussing. It's only going to back up the points so people can see with the episode, with what we're talking about, we can back up with evidence or just statements that were made. Again, my whole thing here is, and on a wrapping point, I don't think Driver did it. I don't think this is my own opinion. But I think when you look at the Secret Service just being just crap and was having a really distorted view of what they actually are in history, and I think a lot of lies and cover-up stuff, that stuff's unexcusable. People should have been fired, things of that sort. But a lot of the cover-up aspect is to block their own problems. I mean, this is what Tunheim talked about when he requested documents from the Secret Service, and 2 weeks later they destroyed those documents. I mean, it's just them
90s,
covering their ass.
Yep. No, it is. And you have people like Rowley was involved too. And I wrote in hidden history, and then I expanded on it in American Memory Hole, my latest book, where this guy, Secret Service agent, I think it was Thomas Mastrovito, who is one of the most incredible things.
The one who was purging documents during the HSCA found a brain serum sample in a freaking filing cabinet, and then apparently got shipped off to a lab institute or destroyed. I don't know.
It was destroyed in a food processor. And it was originally I understood it was what was left of JFK's brain, but then later it was a sample, but a chunk of what was supposed to be JFK's brain. Now, however you look at it, why would you? And apparently he did this at the behest of his superiors. And before that, Rowley had told him they had, I don't know how many filing cabinets worth of documents. And he tasked Mastrovito, and that's where he, I guess, ended up finding this brain thing. To get rid of, pare all this down to one file. It was like 4 or 5 cabinets.
It was 8 cabinets poured down to one cabinet.
Yeah, to one cabinet. And so, why would he say that? I mean, shouldn't he say, okay, see what's there? I mean, okay, I guess you can get rid of what's not significant, but to me, that was just trying to get rid of the evidence. And the brain and the food processor thing, I always tell people that, and they're amazed. I said, look, there's a Secret Service memo about it. I don't know what it means. It makes no sense to me. And why anybody would think that's the proper way to destroy of anyone's brain, let alone the president of the United States. But it's just kind of another and of course Rowley was also involved in Abraham Borden. He refused to back him up and lied and everything. So
you put me in a position.
He wasn't my favorite person.
Because now I have to play the Mastrovito thing I have on it. I again, digging through Warren Commission things, this is voiced over by my buddy Casper, who's a professional voiceover actor, but this is James Mastrovito's testimony.
James Mastrovito was in charge of the JFK assassination file at the Secret Service in 1975. When Mastrovito took charge of the JFK assassination file, it consisted of 5 or 6 file cabinets of material. After Mastrovito finished culling irrelevant material, the collection was down to one 5-drawer file cabinet. Mastrovito guessed that his purging of extraneous material took place around 1970. He said that the extraneous material consisted of records of 2,000 to 3,000 mental cases who called the Secret Service after the Kennedy assassination to claim responsibility for the shooting. Mastrovito offered that Robert Blakey question him about this destruction of documents and pointed out that Chief Rowley's August 1965 memo directed him to remove irrelevant material. Blakey had obtained index cards from the Secret Service. From these cards, Warren Commission members had requested specific Secret Service reports. Apparently, Mastrovito had destroyed some files that Blakey had wanted to see.
Just backing up what you were saying there, my friend, and that wasn't planned or anything. That just randomly happened at the end.
That's very cool. Awesome. I hadn't heard that. I think Bill Kelly again was the first one to bring that memo out. I said, "Wow, I've never heard anything like that." But that's interesting, though. You can see Blakey's hand is in there as well, too. He's conveniently saying, "Well, remember, he told you to get rid of that." But I'm not a fan of Blakey's either.
Again, if you look up some things and they pop up to a person's book, that is interesting. But if it's easier, just to, like some of the stuff we've mentioned, you can look it up and it's like either well known or it's just something that just not a lot of people heard, but it's fact, like they investigated or they looked into it. Look at the HSCA. They were able to ask a lot of questions we're still asking now. So again, I don't think they were all 100% bad. I don't think they were 100% good either. They were in a rush for things. But I think this episode largely focused on just kind of coming at some of the theory, especially with the Secret Service. I knew you had knowledge on the Secret Service and you talked about it a little bit more than others. Don, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show about this. Is there a place where people can find your links and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah. It's, Substack's the only place I'm not being shadow banned. Donald Jeffries at substack.com. It's called I Protest. That's the best place people can find me. My latest book is American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Lie. Promote disinformation, and that has a lot of interesting stuff about the JFK assassination, JFK Jr., lots more, but so people can find some stuff they're not going to find anywhere else.
And buy The Pipe, the Bimbo, and Red People. It's out now. You can find it with William Law.
Yes, that's my only JFK book that I wrote with William Law that's actually just about the JFK assassination. Very much. And I just had, as I think I told you, that's why I couldn't do it yesterday. I just had lunch with Gene Andrews III, who's we're close enough friends to do that. I take him out to lunch probably every month or so. He's on assisted living, but he's the son of the beatnik lawyer played by John Candy in JFK. So
perfect cast. Cool. Perfect cast. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.